March 17, 1982, Jean-Pierre Adams walked into a hospital for routine knee surgery and never woke up again, spending the next 39 years in a coma, while his wife refused to give up on him, visiting every single day for 14,235 days straight. What I'm about to tell you isn't just another sports tragedy, it's a love story that lasted 4 decades and a medical scandal that destroyed one of football's brightest stars in just 7 minutes of negligence that turned into a lifetime of darkness. Jean-Pierre Adams wasn't just any footballer. He was a pioneer, the first black defender to represent France at the highest level, a man who faced down racism on the pitch and won respect through sheer talent. But none of that could save him from what happened in that operating room. Before that fateful day, Adams was living his dream, married to his childhood sweetheart Bernadette, raising their 2 sons, and even though his playing days were behind him at 34, he was building a coaching career until a persistent knee injury required what doctors called a simple routine surgery. Bernadette kissed him goodbye that morning and said, "See you tonight." But tonight never came, because during what should have been a 45-minute procedure, the anesthesiologist made an error that would rob Adams of the rest of his life. And here's the part that will make your blood boil. The anesthesiologist was supervising 8 operations simultaneously that day, 8 different patients, and he left Adams under the care of a trainee who had no qualifications to monitor anesthesia. And when Adams's breathing tube became blocked, it took them 7 catastrophic minutes to notice. 7 minutes without proper oxygen to the brain, 7 minutes that destroyed billions of neurons, 7 minutes that turned a legendary athlete into someone who would never speak, move, or recognize anyone again. But somehow his heart kept beating, and that's where this story becomes something else entirely. The hospital tried to cover it up at first, telling Bernadette it was a complication, but when she demanded answers, the truth came out. The anesthesiologist was overworked, the trainee was unqualified, and the equipment was faulty. But by then, it was too late. Adams was in a permanent vegetative state. Doctors told Bernadette to let him go, that there was no hope, that keeping him alive was cruel. But she looked at them and said, "He's not dead, he's sleeping, and one day he might wake up." And for the next 39 years, she proved that love doesn't understand the word impossible. Every single morning at 7 a.m., Bernadette would arrive at their home, where she cared for Adams, refusing to put him in a facility because she said, "He's my husband, not a patient." And she would talk to him about everything: their grandchildren, football matches, the weather, as if he could hear every word. She would play his favorite music, dress him in his PSG jerseys on match days, and when France won the World Cup in 1998 and 2018, she put the radio next to his ear and whispered, "Your team won, Jean-Pierre. They did it." Even though his eyes never flickered with recognition. The financial burden was crushing. The French Football Federation helped at first, but as years turned to decades, the support dwindled, and Bernadette worked multiple jobs to afford the round-the-clock care, selling their possessions one by one, but never once complaining, because she said, "He would do the same for me." Former teammates would visit in the early years. Marius Tresor would sit by his bedside and tell him jokes. Michel Platini came once and cried so hard he never came back, because seeing Adams like that was too painful. But Bernadette never cried in front of him. She said tears were for private moments, not for Jean-Pierre. The cruelest part was that Adams's body remained strong. His heart beat steadily, his hair grew, his nails needed cutting, he aged naturally, which gave Bernadette hope that somewhere inside her husband was still fighting. But neurologists explained his brainstem kept his body alive, while his consciousness was gone forever. In 1996, 14 years into the coma, French courts finally ruled on the malpractice case, finding the hospital and anesthesiologist guilty, but the compensation was insulting, about €800 per month for a life destroyed, and Bernadette said, "They valued my husband's life at less than minimum wage." Sometimes Adams would make sounds that seemed like responses. His eyes would track movement occasionally, and Bernadette would get excited thinking this was the breakthrough. But doctors explained these were just reflexes, not signs of consciousness, yet she chose to believe they meant something more. The loneliness was unbearable. Bernadette spent every holiday, every birthday, every anniversary talking to a man who couldn't respond, watching their sons grow up, get married, have children, all while their father lay frozen in time, trapped between life and death. Other families in similar situations would visit Bernadette for advice, and she would tell them, "Don't listen to anyone who says give up, love doesn't have an expiration date," and she became an unwitting spokesperson for families dealing with coma patients worldwide. In 2016, when France debated right-to-die laws, politicians tried to use Adams as an example, but Bernadette furiously rejected them, saying, "Jean-Pierre is not your political tool, he's a human being and I decide what's best for him, not the government," and her fierce protection of him made headlines. She would read him newspapers every morning, keeping him updated on world events, and when terrorist attacks or tragedies occurred, she would hold his hand and say, "The world is still crazy, Jean-Pierre, but we're safe here together," creating their own bubble of peace in an increasingly chaotic world. The room where Adams lay became a shrine to his life. Football trophies, team photos, wedding pictures surrounded his bed, and Bernadette would point to each one daily saying, "Remember this goal, remember this match, remember when you proposed," hoping something would trigger a miracle. Young PSG players would sometimes visit as part of club tradition, and they would stand awkwardly not knowing what to say to this legend who couldn't acknowledge them, and Bernadette would tell them, "Just talk to him about football, that's what he loves," and sometimes they'd describe their latest match while Adams lay silent. In 2020, during COVID lockdowns, Bernadette was terrified she couldn't visit him, but she fought for and received special permission because she said, "I haven't missed a day in 38 years. I'm not starting now," and she wore full PPE to continue their daily routine even during a global pandemic. The medical community studied Adams's case extensively, trying to understand how someone could survive in a coma for so long, and the consensus was that Bernadette's care was literally keeping him alive, that her voice, her touch, her presence somehow sustained him in ways science couldn't explain. She would celebrate their wedding anniversary every year, buying 2 pieces of cake, eating one, and leaving the other beside him, saying, "Maybe next year we'll eat together." And after 39 anniversaries spent this way, she never lost that hope, even when everyone else had given up decades ago. On September 6, 2021, Bernadette noticed Jean-Pierre's breathing had changed, and she knew after 39 years of watching him that something was different. So she held his hand and said, "It's okay, my love. If you need to go, I'll be all right." And he died that afternoon, finally free. At his funeral, hundreds came, including young footballers who weren't even born when Adams played, but who knew his story. And Bernadette stood strong, saying, "I had 39 years more with him than I should have had. That's not a tragedy, that's a gift," but everyone could see her heart was shattered. She had spent more time caring for him in a coma than they had been together when he was conscious, 39 years versus 23 years. And when asked if she regretted it, she said, "Every morning I got to say I love you, and even if he couldn't say it back, I knew he felt it." The hospital where it happened now has the Adams protocol, requiring 1 anesthesiologist per patient, and his case is taught in medical schools as an example of catastrophic negligence, but also of the power of unconditional love that defied medical logic for 4 decades. Bernadette still lives in their home, surrounded by memories, and every morning at 7 a.m. she still wakes up at the exact time she used to start caring for him, and she says that's when she talks to him now, because just because he's gone doesn't mean I stop loving him. This isn't just a story about a footballer who spent 39 years in a coma. It's about a woman who redefined what love means, who showed the world that marriage vows in sickness and in health aren't just words, but a sacred promise that she kept for 14,235 days without fail.